Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 5th of August and this is Indexer Office Hours 218. Oh, sorry, 19. Sorry, my bad. Thank you for reposting the agenda there. Link is in the agenda if you'd like to get access to that there. For anyone who is new to Indexer Office Hours, this is the town square where graph ecosystem participants come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers. As always, as I like to say, this is a conversation and we do love participation, so feel free to get involved in today's conversation via voice or text. In particular, we have a very important discussion that we'd like to host with all of you today, and we'd love your input, so feel free to get involved. If you have any challenges with your microphone, do let me know in the chat, and I will try and get that sorted for you. As a reminder, this session is going to be recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube, so if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let's get into today's exciting agenda. I will hand over straight to our regularly scheduled to Carlos, who runs our regularly scheduled repo watch section. So without further ado, feel free to take it away.
Hi everyone. Okay, thanks for the applause and welcome back to another repo watch. This week we're going to start with, I'm pretty sure most of you will already be aware, but there's a new 𝗨𝗂𝗪𝗀 v2 that was released just one day of our last repo watch because Polygon hit a bug and it basically stopped.
Another one.
So we have 𝗨𝗪𝗀 0.2.16 out, and this is a critical update. If you haven't updated yet, your Polygon shit show continues. Yes, Matthew, your Polygon should be stopped until you do so. Other than that, it's been fortunately a bit calmer. There's a few patch releases. There's one for Avalanche, nothing huge, but always good to update in general. There's one for Nethermind as well. So Avalanche is at 1.13.4. Nethermind is at 1.32.4. Then there's the Get update, which has become exciting lately because they did introduce a bunch of relevant optimizations. This is a patch fix, fixing some issues. It's now 1.16.2. Streaming Fast also put a new Firehose Ethereum. We have version 2.12.4 rolled out, and it should bring optimizations and further stability. And I think that's it for the execution client updates. On the consensus layer, we have a new patch version for Nimbus, so 25.7.1. Also, not critical, but good to update. No news on the GraphSec this week, and on Launchpad, we have releases to keep up upstream. So there's an 𝗨𝗪𝗀 v2 chart, a Nimbus one, and a proxyd, which update the latest versions. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Juan for the protocol watch.
Thanks, Carlos. Okay, getting into protocol watch, we have for foreign governance, we have 3 disputes. Those are GDR 39, 40, and 41. They are relatively new disputes, although we will be giving some brief messages on those whenever we have an update, most likely today or tomorrow. For foreign research, we don't have any new updates. For the contracts repository, we have a bunch of PR updates on the latest round of audits from Trust. So everything is apparently Horizon related. So, all of those PRs are linked in the agenda if you're interested in any of those. And for the network subgraphs, we do have a small update. As some of you, or probably many of you, are aware, there were some issues with the EBO late last week, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Those were fixed with the 0.3.1 release of the subgraph, which added correct last epoch support. So we fixed the scroll epoch that was broken, and we were able to update the latest epoch for scroll. There is one caveat. There is one missing epoch, I think, in the middle, which I would assume no one's going to be using it because no one closed allocations during that epoch. So nothing should be noted aside from one missing epoch. everything else should be working correctly. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. So I'm gonna be handing over to Kate now.
Awesome. Similar to last week's update, we have our Chapel report, which did pass the tab, and we'll work on getting our Sepolia report through governance as well. I think we're seeing some broader consensus around the total difficulty issue and how we might handle it going forward. And so once we have a clearer timeline in terms of when rewards might be activated, I'll be posting that in the indexer channel so you guys are ready. You can get infrastructure ready if you need it. And we started testing for Unichain. So I'll keep you posted on the status of that and the timeline as well. And that's it.
All righty, awesome. Now we will move on to the Network Watch segment. So, Mitch, I believe there are some subgraphs that you'd like to highlight for the group.
Oh, yes. Sorry if you can't hear me very well. I've got a bit of a sore throat today. But yes, we've just got a few subgraphs. I'm going to go ahead and post those in the chat now. So all of these indexes, thank you. All of these indexes, all of these developers over the course of the week were requesting that indexes start indexing those. And I've also got another one here that was just deployed by 𝗨𝗂 recently. They haven't added any signal to it just yet, but they've asked if it can be indexed, and I've asked them to add some signal. So I assume they will do that shortly, but they haven't replied to me yet. And that's that one. That's the 𝗨𝗂 one. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, the links are all there, so guys, feel free to check out. And yeah, just to address Payne's point, it's not so much like to beg people to start indexing, but just to highlight that yeah, these are subgraphs that are having some challenges and could do with some support. So it's more like just highlighting. So hopefully it's helpful. But if you have any suggestions on how we can improve the segment, then please do share, because we want to make sure that this is maximally helpful. Okay, so I want to make sure we have enough time for the rest of today's open discussion, which is going to be a large one. So as you guys remember, last week we had Slim come on towards the end of the conversation and just share a few thoughts on some of the new things that are coming out and some announcements. And so he mentioned that there was a discussion at the Indexer Working Group on Thursday, and that he would come back today and share a few thoughts. So yeah, Slim, without further ado, feel free to come on and talk a bit about what was discussed on Thursday and what the implications are, and let's try and continue this conversation in today's IOH, because yeah, it's obviously a very important one.
Yeah, absolutely. To go a little bit back to the context that I shared last IOH, it was shared towards the end, so some of you might have missed that if you were short on time or if you didn't attend last week's IOH. So what we shared then is that the graph has gone through quite some significant changes over the past couple of months, and some of these things have led into a roadmap where we are not only exploring some very exciting new data services and new revenue stream possibilities for indexes, but we are also revisiting some of the decisions that were made in the past, and will make some bold changes to those. And one of the things that we discussed last week was a eligibility criteria for indexes that will make it harder for indexes to just farm rewards on the graph network, and that will encourage them or make it so that they cannot just farm rewards from value-adding indexes, and that those eligibility criteria, we presented a proposal last week, a starting point for a discussion, but it's a discussion where we want to have a lot of indexer participation and also want to encourage participation from other network participants and community members. So we took that discussion, we looked at some initial criteria, and we took them to an indexer experience working group that is now made public. It's the most active indexer experience working group we've had since that call started in 2021. So that was pretty exciting to see that indexers are getting engaged and starting to work more closely with core teams and the foundation again. And we would love to continue that conversation here on this session. And what was discussed there was we went through some of the caveats and some of the challenges with having eligibility criteria, especially with regards to being able to game the criteria and having criteria in such a way that either we stay ahead of anyone trying to game the criteria, or that we design a more foolproof eligibility oracle. And we also went through quite a few of the questions on last week's IO8. So Payne, is there any? So Payne will be leading some of the discussion on the eligibility criteria and working on this with me. So was there any particular point that you wanted to highlight from our previous discussion at the Indexer Experience Working Group?
So yeah, well, the previous discussion that we had on this topic was basically just an introduction to all the indexers, and like we've had some discussions about like whether or not this is actually a good idea to go ahead with, because first off, if I recall correctly, we were having like the main discussion was like whether or not to make it easy on the majority of indexers to get on board of. Just 1 second, I see a message from Vince here. So Vince says, I'd like to start away from indexes first and clean the garbage. So when they do have to select subgraphs, they actually have literally any queries in the first place. Okay. Don't query your abandoned subgraph for a month. Get marked. Oh yeah, this was something we've chatted about in the discussion, but this was an adjacent conversation. So Vince basically proposed that we would change the current design, like on top of the eligibility criteria for indexers, we should change the way we handle subgraphs with signal but no queries. So basically, like make curators a more involved part of the network. But I think, Vince, we are kind of diverging a little bit on the topic here. And Derek says, there is an issue with denying subgraph that curation is excluded. Yes, we've also talked about this. The idea was to actually nuke their curation signal entirely.
Yeah, that was just kind of my. I don't think I'm trying to be too adjacent. It's just that before I think you levy things on indexers, like right now, an indexer's job to even be positive on the network is hunting and querying the EBO, or querying various subgraphs to find out where queries even exist. There's a bunch of garbage subgraphs. We have 13,000 subgraphs and only 10 billion queries a month. There are masses of subgraphs that are just being picked up and indexed and doing, like, even indexers that are meaningful indexers are doing invaluable work. They're just, it's a place to put your stake. and they're being indexed just to put your stake there to extract rewards, and there's no actually meaningful work there, and the meaningful work subgraphs are very few and far between. And I think it makes visualizing for indexers to do meaningful work a lot easier, rather than I guess a stick or baton to say indexers behave, indexers behave. I think that I think we first need to talk about how do you make it easier for an indexer to be valuable in the first place.
But what
'Cause
stops me from just sending 10,000 random queries on my subgraph every some time and just keep the subgraph there?
you're gonna pay for it.
I think the point he's trying to make though is there's a difference between, could malicious activity skew this 100%? But right now we have non-malicious, we just have indifferent activity because that's just the way that it exists. And that indifferent activity is actually an inefficiency because there's no real value to what's being generated there. It's just the way that things exist.
Yeah,
so can we at least
don't get me wrong, Derek. Like 100% I support this idea. But yeah, I was just trying to be the devil's advocate here.
Yeah, separate devil's advocate. Would it be easier to just have, and maybe the answer to this is no. Would it be easier to just take a segment of the total indexing rewards and apply it as dips curated by someone in the network?
Can you try to explain how would that work?
Yeah, so we have a 3% annual issuance. Right now it's all being divvied out based off of the signal markets. In the process of kind of scaling that down, if a percentage of those indexing rewards were instead allocated to specified subgraphs as, hey, these are things of value, and then you had a split kind of going that way through however dips is created, now you're starting to use the incentives of the network towards driving intended behaviors rather than general behaviors.
Yeah, and I also think what I'm talking about leans into what you were talking about earlier with Mitchell, posting some subgraphs that people should index or need to be indexed, which is obviously a huge inefficiency because you kind of have to ask in Discord, hey, can you guys jump on this? And the main reason for that is you can't trust Signal. The Signal doesn't mean there's queries. Signal doesn't mean there's indexing. Or Signal doesn't mean anything. It's a completely useless noise. But if that were to be cleaned up and have more curators actually have some job that they can also be punished for not doing their job, if I could trust Signal, Mitchell wouldn't have to post anything.
Yeah, that's true.
I think for now, though, I think we should focus on the eligibility proposal. And just to wrap up the part of the Signal part is that so around 5% of all subgraphs with Signal receive well, around 5% of all subgraphs receive 0 queries, while around 50% of all indexes is serving 0 queries. So half of all indexes are only.
Can you repeat that? 5% of all subgraphs do what?
Have absolutely 0 queries, while 50% of indexes serve 0 queries. So I think there's there is an indicator there that there are indexes that are not even attempting to serve queries, and that is what this eligibility criteria attempts to solve for, not to alone solve all of the imbalances that we have in the economic system of the graph, but more so to start somewhere. And I do encourage people, though, to make suggestions in the forum to other proposals as well, but I think we should take one proposal at a time because there will always be other proposals as well. And
Derek is asking, when you're saying 50% of all indexes serve 0 queries, are you referring to serve or claim rewards on the subgraphs? Like, how is
So
that
this was
50% calculated? Is it actually served queries?
let me check the number because I have both of those numbers here. But I believe it was actually serving queries. Let me check those numbers though while during this conversation. So yeah, this was based on actually having query attempts. Okay, query attempts is few. Yeah. Let me see. It's a good response from the gateway. That is what we are looking at. Not 50%, sorry, 30% is the one that is serving 0 queries. And if I'm also to sort away those that are serving very few queries or serving very few subgraphs, that's when you got up to 50%. As the eligibility criteria are proposed, that would be 50%, but 30% have 0 good responses to the gateway.
So
Yeah,
this is
30% definitely seems like it would be a if you were to guess like roughly where it would be, I feel like 30% is kind of the gut feeling like, yeah, that seems to be accurate.
So this 30% is basically just people that have their indexer service endpoint just completely off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And that
what if the only criteria was service endpoint on? That would eliminate all of them, right? Unless they turned it back on.
so the eligibility criteria as they are, like, so I'm looking at that and that translates into days online, but like where to be online, you need to have your service endpoint on and you need to serve 10 subgraphs every 28 days period. And to be like, if I look at the numbers then around 47% is at 0 days online, where they either is not serving a single query, that's 30% of them, and then another 20% is serving queries, a few queries, but it's mostly on just a handful of subgraphs. And then there's very few between like 0 days and 25 days. And the other majority is 43% of indexes have 26 to 28 days online according to these criteria. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is that yes, that is what the impact will lie. It's not on how many queries they serve, but more on like filtering away those that are not even having their service endpoint online. And this is also an opportunity though to encourage indexes to serve more subgraphs and serve subgraphs based on how much stake they have, total allocated and self-stake. Sorry, total like the total delegation plus self-stake. And we could adjust that number to be proportional to how much stake you have. So that was another thing that we started to discuss on Thursday.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best ways of dealing with this. But we need to think about a number that actually makes sense and that doesn't like put your indexer at the risk of if we set this number too low, that would basically force, say, one of those like big indexers that are like not doing much to just focus on the number of subgraphs they allocate to. So they might skew the rewards for everybody on the network, and not only the rewards but also the QoS, because if they allocate badly, other indexes can't allocate on those subgraphs. So yeah, it starts becoming a snowball effect, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but at least like I think it would be a step in the right direction where we are encouraging indexes to allocate more widely. And as you point out as well, it needs to be enough leeway that external factors, like for example a bug in one of the indexer components, or a period of time where one of the networks, like say that one of your main networks that you're serving is Polygon, and Polygon have some issues globally, then you shouldn't be punished for that as an indexer. So it needs to be enough leeway that you can act in best interest and work towards serving a lot of queries, but not be like right at the limit, right? Like, so the biggest indexer should not have exactly as many subgraphs that they need to serve queries on every single indexer or every single subgraph. Sorry, that would be too much. But we can definitely pull all of those numbers. I pulled those numbers in this weekend actually, and looked at the curation signal on every subgraph, and looked at the queries going to every subgraph. And I think it makes sense to. I think we can find some numbers that make sense when it comes to like ratio of sake to subgraphs.
I'm curious what other people's thoughts on this are. I think it's a great idea, but yeah.
I think we need to be very careful about every single, I guess, check mark that an indexer needs to make, because every single thing leads to edge cases, leads to things with affecting indexer rewards. Like my stake might be here right now, but then I get delegated to, and now suddenly I was on vacation for 2 days or whatever, and I got this huge allocation, and now I'm not meeting the raising demand or the dropping demand of how many subgraphs I should be allocated to. Obviously, you want to give yourself buffer, but it just leads to weird edge cases like that, where you're just literally turning off indexing rewards for an indexer with shifting things in edge cases. And I think we should start really simple, really small, to see how that affects indexers, because there's a lot there. We don't know what we don't know. And I think we need to be very careful when messing with rewards.
Yeah, we actually also discussed about like being very dynamic with this change. Like, it's not going to be something that will be written in stone, and we actually want to make it adapt to the like whatever indexers feel like it's a good number overall. Not only referring to the amount of subgraphs to be served, but like for every single criteria that we come up with. We want to be very very dynamic with everything.
Wouldn't this need council approval though, and that's going to take 3 weeks?
I was hoping no, because if we need council approval, then we're screwed.
Well, then who's the master changer? Because then you need to have someone that has a button to mess with index rewards with no oversight.
Well, it's the same as the subgraph availability oracle, right? Like that is also changing the rewards for individual subgraphs without any council approval for everyone.
You don't change the criteria on the SAR, right?
Exactly, but what we could do is that we could define in the proposal, we could define certain levers that the ones owning the eligibility oracle are able to pull on without council approval, and they would approve that. Okay, these are the criteria that we can change, and if any changes outside of those, then we need council approval, right? Like we could do that in a. They could have an area of operation. Like they couldn't turn off all rewards for everybody just because they want to. It could be that they can change gradually a certain criteria, or they can choose to pause the eligibility oracle so that everybody gets rewards if there's any.
What if we do it like in Cosmos ecosystem, where you cannot set your commission higher than like X% of X amount of time? Say we do the same with the criteria that we're changing.
Yeah, so that could work, right? But it's also, as Derek says, like it does add a lot of complexity if we do this from a smart contract point of view, and both the eligibility oracle, the gateway selection algorithm, and other components in the stack. It's not like there are changes to the graph stack that happens from time to time without it having to go through the council. So
Yeah, but
I
this
think
affects rewards. Putting a large lever in the hands of just a single core dev, I think would be a huge mistake. Even if it was a 10% thing, they could just change it overnight. Indexers don't even know about it. Like there's no tracking on that. There's no auditing. It's just there's this lever and someone could be changing it 3% to 5% willy-nilly, and
That would
we
make
don't
it a
know.
multi-sig within indexing community.
Yeah, but then you
No,
need a
no,
council.
no. The council's there for a reason, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
complain all you like about how long they take to do things. Whatever, I don't care. They're there for this specific reason, right? So that there is some accountability. Okay, using that word loosely. Don't kill me. But some accountability that a decision was made and a signature was signed somewhere on a multi-sig to say, we, the people who signed this, we support this or we don't support this, right? So it's there, use it. And if it's not working at the speed you need it to work at, say something.
yeah, that's a very good point. And as I said, like we don't need to. They can define certain criteria, and that we can, like whoever's running the eligibility oracle can operate within. And if there's any changes outside of that, we would need a council approval. Like that could then be an option as well. But I
Even
don't
changing
think
1% shouldn't be in the hands of anybody. It's one person.
I think Payne makes a good point though, like the architecture of this, like simplicity, of course, we have to keep this as simple as possible. But if you do want some flexibility, you know, you can look at other models where you can only increase it by a certain amount, or there's only a certain margin in which it can be increased without a council approval, something along those lines. That's another option. But like, can't hammer home enough how important it is to start simple with stuff like this and not pull too many levers at the same time.
So one recommendation on that point specifically, I love the idea of like simply, is status on? Cool. You can close an allocation and claim it. And if you're not able to successfully respond to one query, then you can close your allocations. You're just going to get 0 GRT, right? That doesn't really benefit any of the well-intentioned indexers. It's not like everyone else makes more money. It's simply that person kind of burns their GRT. And then if their allocation gets past the 28 epochs, they still haven't fixed it, they haven't claimed it. Other well-intentioned indexers can say, okay, cool, let's burn your allocation. And now it's up to you to go and replace an allocation. But at a certain point, if they're not able to do the work to successfully serve a query, they're going to leave the network.
Yeah.
And I think that is just like the bare bones, most simple step towards like, hey, and this is, a part of kind of a larger feeling a little bit, but it's the first step of us kind of saying like, hey, part of our job as indexers is to keep each other honest, and we need to start being a lot better about that. And that includes like closing people's stuff when it's past the deadline. And especially with this type of an implementation, if they just simply are not able to run their infra and they can't successfully respond to a query, then they shouldn't get paid, right? They should take the loss on that.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this for a long time, of just an oracle to say, are you awake? I think we've said that for a long time.
Yeah.
To have that be a requirement of agent, to say, hey, is this thing up? Okay, cool.
But
And it's
that
really simple.
But those numbers on just the endpoint being online
And responsive.
is also and responsive is also different. Like the ones that it says ready to roll, like that is actually quite a lot more indexes is actually responding with ready to roll on the index endpoint there.
And then where does the, like, if it's ready to roll, like, why doesn't it respond to queries then? Like somewhere in their stock might be broken then, or what? Because like it doesn't make sense from a technical perspective. Because you can reach their indexer service that way. That means
that
it can
doesn't
serve
necessarily mean
queries.
it's connected to a query node, does it? It might not be coming.
Wouldn't the indexer service actually start complaining and crash loop in that case? Because I don't remember exactly how it's built, but it should.
But yeah,
if I recall correctly, it complains about port 8030 in that case.
what Matthew said anyway.
Lol.
Yes, also that. Doesn't mean it's going to an actual service, because showing it and responding to a query are very different things.
Yeah.
So, because if it can respond to like an Oracle query of "Am I up Oracle?" that means through the pathway it went to service and went to a query node, and it exists and has some type of required data on it or whatever. That would be a simple "is it up" check, because if you can actually put a query through it with some type of Oracle, that means it is alive.
Yeah, that would be like the purest form of this uptime Oracle, but it would also be harder to dispute it, right? Like if with a query, you would have to, if we hinted on queries, they actually have to show that there's that they have index the data and that they can serve one, and they will submit a response on chain as well, and that can be disputable. So if they try to fake any of the queries and pretend that they are up, they would open themselves for slashing. So they would actually need to serve a query that holds the payload, and I think that could be valuable as well.
Isn't the quality of service an okay source of truth to determine whether or not an indexer has served at least one successful query?
Yeah, what I meant is if the eligibility criteria is only based on the status endpoint and not on the quality of service oracle. So that's what I meant. Like the eligibility criteria would most likely be based on or getting data from the quality of service oracle. What I'm saying is that if it's only checking the endpoint and not requiring an actual query to be sent, then it might still be able to be gamed in a way.
One thing I want to make sure that we don't run into is having indexers to send themselves queries to the subgraphs they're allocated to, so that they can close the allocations with like valid, being marked as valid allocations from the perspective of the indexer availability oracle. Like, we don't need to add more pain in the ass. Like, we need to make it as natural as possible for like indexers that they're currently doing their job. Just like I wouldn't want to have to check if the subgraphs I'm serving have actual queries or not. Like,
yeah, but I think there's also a cost to implementing that type of stuff, right? Like if I'm an indexer and let's say I'm let's say I'm an evil indexer, right? For me to go and set up a subgraph and stuff that I can index and I can respond to queries and all that stuff, like there's work I would have to do. And then I would start to associate like, okay, is that work with cheating the system less than the work of actually doing something correctly? And in some cases, the answer to that may be yes, maybe no. Just kind of, bring that malicious activity does have a time cost associated to it. And I think for implementing the simplest solution, just a simple like, has there been any success? Okay, cool. You can close your allocations and get. Sorry, I'm stepping a little too far away from my computer. If there's any success, then you can, close your allocations and get rewards for them. If there's no success, you can close your allocations. You're just not going to get any rewards. And I think that's a great first step towards building better behaviors and with the indexers that are problematic.
Yeah. I want to highlight both of these points. I want to highlight this, what Derek just mentioned, and what Ford has mentioned as well in chat. So I just want to double down on what Derek mentioned first, that if we make this system in such a way that it is harder to game the system than to actually serve queries and provide value to the network. That's all we need. We don't need to make a foolproof eligibility oracle. Simply make it harder. And if we are flexible with the eligibility oracle, we can, and we are committing to constantly monitoring and updating the criteria as needed. It may very well be harder to try to fake it, because anyone trying to fake volume or fake uptime will know that we will be monitoring and potentially change the criteria every X months, right? And Ford is making a very good point that also 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗧 made in the index experience working group call, that the Oracle can also send real queries and validate the query result. For example, sending it to multiple indexes, or it could also be on the gateway level, where the gateway sends a result or sends a query just to make sure that it's not a spoofed query that an indexer is sending to themselves. So they are like copying and making sure that it's an actual valid query that is being sent.
Chain head query. Yeah, you don't want to time travel to start block and get null results.
But how would that
Exactly.
stop me from sending a query to myself? But like,
you could send a query to yourself,
yeah,
but it would also verify. It would also verify like a chain head query.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I do agree if that makes it more complex for potato indexers to be less potatoes in this case. But it would also make me, like, if we're going to force this per subgraph, which I hope we won't, which this whole thing forces me to make sure that the subgraphs that I'm allocating towards have queries, because otherwise I get no rewards, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this implementation, it's that you are allocated to at least one valid subgraph and serving at least one valid query.
This define valid subgraph. I have 100k GRT. Wait,
Sure.
let me present this example. I have 100k GRT. I'm a poor indexer. I can only allocate like five subgraphs because I don't have good hardware. So I pick the ones that they are giving me like the most amount of rewards, like indexing rewards, based off curation. But somehow those subgraphs get 0 fucking queries in my allocation. And what's going to happen then? Do I get no rewards because this happens, or like?
So that is where I wonder. So if we can use math and statistics, and we can look at how many subgraphs are getting 0 queries, or how many subgraphs are getting just a handful of queries, and enough that if there's
my biggest problem
indexes,
is the geolocation, because if I spin my indexer in like a non-European or non-North American location, then I get way less chances of getting to serve a query on any subgraphs whatsoever. And I don't say that as this is a good thing or not, but it might spook away indexers, like small indexers that actually want to spin up indexing instances in remote locations, and we further drive centralization into the protocol, which is already pretty centralized.
Yeah, but why not? Why not allow someone to just spoof a query and show, hey, yeah, I am on. Check it out.
I think it'd be cool to just have, kind of like another component we run, kind of like a mesh network checking on all indexers within it, and basically querying each other and expecting results in some way, some type of like indexer mesh network. That way we don't need EdgeNode or somebody else, one of the core devs running this Oracle or whatever, but more of a mesh network where indexers are talking to each other. Checking if they are up, and if you have 6 indexers all saying a query does not go through to this indexer, then you can be sufficiently marked as you're not eligible for rewards. Your indexer endpoint is sort of, yeah. but using that in line with just making sure a simple thing, not touching anything else or behavior, just are you running the software that you're getting paid to run? And that's like the very bottom line limitation of being able to receive results.
What if you're one indexer that is running 6 indexes, and you just like
you don't get to determine who picks you.
okay, so you get a random one.
Yeah, it's just
But
random.
that also sounds like a very like a big engineering task to implement as well. Like you kind of have an uptime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have a peer-to-peer uptime oracle, and that might be where this thing is headed. But is that where it's needed right now? Right now, like at this moment, 30% of all indexes are not serving queries, and is it worth waiting until we are able to implement something like this, which might look very different for other data services down the line? At least in my opinion, I think we are at the point in the graph network where we need to be leaner and more adaptive to changes, especially knowing there are other data services that we might want to run in the future. So
leaner is leaning towards more centralization, which is what we need less of.
So Josh, currently he's asking how much stake it represents. So looking at the 50% that I mentioned, so 30% are not serving queries at all. 50% is serving queries, but they either have very few days of uptime, or they are not serving queries on enough subgraphs. And for those 50%, that represents around 20% of the total stake on the graph network. So that means those 20% would be, if we were to encourage them either to improve the quality of service, that would mean a better global quality of service on the graph. If they instead choose to leave the network, that would mean 20% of the rewards would go to all other indexes on the network. So.
And also 20% of the entire network will go to Binance, which you wouldn't want.
So this has also been modeled, and I think it's in the long term it is a better economic. It's better economics for every indexer on the network to ensure that everybody is providing a good quality of service. So.
I don't know. I just think a centralized something like this isn't like we've already seen just recently with what happened with the EBO, and the centralization problems with that. So I think in anything we do, we need to not start with the centralized and decentralized part later. We should be starting with the from the other angle, because we saw what happened with EVO, and if that happens to rewards, it's going to be a lot bigger of a deal than just not being able to close for 2 days.
What you're talking about is resilience, though, right? You're not talking about decentralization.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about resilience, but also in that we're not having to have some lever where council is having to push buttons or give a core dev a guiding principle in which they can adjust that lever as dynamically. I would also say that it's just a single aspect of are you up, and then not having to run a centralized tool that no one can see, no one can audit, no one can look at, and having that tool run within the network, run by all indexers, just simply checking, are you alive? Are you doing what you're being paid to do? But keeping that tooling and everything in the open, and that tool run by all indexers rather than placing that tool in into the hands of core devs to run. Because something like that would make sure that you are up and you're doing what you say you're doing. And that's just like, I would say that's the bare minimum of an indexer. You know, there's lots of other things you can do. Put a bunch of curation on stuff and sit on stuff with low entities and not really serve queries and stuff like that. But I think that's more of an incentive issue rather than an indexer issue, because people are going to shove stake on stuff that's going to make them money by nature. So I think the latter is more of an incentive problem, rather than just a "are you doing your job" problem.
Yeah, I think the one question there is, though, is do we want to incentivize a workload that is proportional to the amount of stake that we have, and that will need a more of a an eligibility oracle that have more data.
With that, even the subgraphs, that doesn't mean I'm doing any work. I can just spawn 10 subgraphs or just use existing of the 13,000 subgraphs that have very little signal and no work to do with low entity counts. I'm not benefiting the network at all, and I'm still collecting. And all I had to do was just allocate to 9 more subgraphs that do absolutely nothing.
How much are you collecting though, right? How much is this actually a real problem when you look at the whole network? Are we talking about 10 little fish playing their little grey hat games? Are we talking about an indexer with 100 million GRT who can play the same games, Vince? Because I don't think we are talking about the same people, the same demographic.
Well, I think out of the demographic he's talking about, that would turn off rewards on 30% of the indexers. I would venture to say that maybe only one of them is in that edge case, and the other 29% of indexers are low-hanging fruit. They're not the largest indexers in the network that are just doing nothing, because like you said, you don't really have a choice because you have to put your stake somewhere. But the lower indexers that aren't, I would be willing to venture that most of these 30% that don't even have their service endpoints working are not the biggest indexers in the network, because it's just, why would you do that? Maybe there are some, but I would say
when I first started exploring this and looking at the numbers, many of the top 20 indexes on the network are in that list, either permanently or like this, or they have longer periods of days, weeks, or months where they are not serving any queries. And this also is for the largest indexes on the network. So right now, that figure that I said, with 20% of the stake, is a good representative, but it also doesn't mean that it's a static 20%. Sometimes I've seen that figure go a lot higher, and sometimes it's also a lot lower because of these large indexes that do not have any direct incentive except people reaching out to them from the graph community and saying, hey, why are you running a large indexer and not serving queries? So if we then encourage them to have this, like there's something about like large indexes, even if they only need to have 10 days of uptime per month, they do not want to take that risk and turn off their indexer for 20 days per month and then turn it on for 10 days. Like you could encourage a lot better behavior also from those indexes. So.
But it sounds like it starts with uptime, as the base case, before really thinking about anything else at all. So what's the easiest way to track that? The gateway is obviously pinging us for cost models constantly, right? What's the Oracle doing? What's the QoS Oracle doing? Just collecting data? I don't really know how it works. What's the easiest way to collect uptime data? and be transparent about it.
The QoS subgraph basically reads whatever is happening inside the. Well, there's something that reads from the gateway and posts on chain the data from the gateway, since the gateway isn't like readily available to inspect it publicly. So that thing posts whatever the gateway is doing on chain, and then the EBO. The subgraph basically indexes the data from the chain.
So would it be fair to say that any of these indexers that fall into this demographic of only being up X days out of Y in a month wouldn't be able to, will basically show up as nearly non-existent in the QoS data?
Yeah.
I mean, that's it then, right? I mean, if you're looking for a solution sooner rather than later, then it's something along those lines. What you're basically doing is you're listening to the wires, right? That's what you're doing. You're listening to what's happening on the network. Yes, there's centralization there because we don't, the gateway is being run by one company. So our only real reliance is on the data that's coming from that. The centralization is the data that's coming from that. You could farm that out to indexers. It would be complex though. I mean, it starts as just a basic smoke ping tool, right? But it gets complex very quickly if you want to try and collate all that data. But either way, whether it was coming from indexers or it's coming from data that comes ultimately from the gateway, which is it's just an obvious place to get that information from. We should probably focus on that specifically to start off with, before we go off into these different territories of complexity and gamification and all that stuff, right? Because I think the real driving objective should always be that we put the network in a better place from a point of honest behavior than we had it in prior, right? We can't add anything that's going to increase the incentive to be dishonest. If we're decreasing it, because at the moment it's purely an basically an honesty-based system, whatever we put in place has to improve that, otherwise it doesn't meet the objectives.
Yeah, I think we diverged a little bit from the main idea that we started with. So essentially, last time in the workshop, we discussed about what Edge Node has come up with in terms of criteria for eligibility for indexes. And basically, we started with the discussion with indexes must have been online for a minimum of 5 days in 28-day period, and at least one good query on a minimum of 10 subgraphs for whatever of those 5 days, and so on and so forth. So the criteria was pretty loose in that regard. So I think we kind of diverged quite a lot from the initial discussion. And I still think we should start with something in the lines of that first off, and then figure out how to restrict the criteria a little bit and a little bit more over time, rather than just starting with hey, you haven't served a query on a subgraph, then fuck off. That's quite bad UX from my perspective. So starting small and increasing it later, I think it's a better approach.
I think it's a fair approach as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Start relatively weak, but you put all the communication in place to make indexers and other people who are interested aware that this is coming, and then it happens, and that's part of that. You've communicated a plan for what's going to happen over the next quarter, into the second half of the year. These are the plan phases about tightening up those rules, where that 5 might turn to 10, might turn to 15, might turn to 20. I don't know. We want to watch what happens and decide on some metrics to watch on the network to see if it's helping improve availability of indexers or not. Otherwise, right, why else are we doing this?
Yeah, exactly my point. I think that's the fair approach to this. But yeah, we're now going back to the problem and who controls these parameters, who gives the green flag, who gives the red flag if something goes wrong. and so on and so forth.
I think you've taken away a lot of the levers. If it's just this uptime, the only metric is it on? That's it. There isn't 10% of this or blah blah blah, or you have to X amount
Well,
of
no.
subtracts. It's just
When I say uptime, that's not. I mean, maybe I'm not clear on what I mean, Vince. When I say uptime, what I'm really saying is listening to the wire, right? So listening to what the QoS subgraph is saying. So it's almost like taking a sample of what's going on the network. Are you part of that? Are you not part of that? You know, where on that scale of being a participant are you? Are you below the threshold or above the threshold? You know, more than just sort of, you know, ready to roll or whatever.
Yeah, I guess maybe what I'm saying is which wires are we listening to?
Yeah, the most obvious ones, I think, to start off with. If you're indexing on the network, you will have served some queries. Simple as that.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think that is probably a good ending point for the discussion today. Like, we'll revisit this as well on the Index Experience Working Group next week, which is on Thursdays. So if anyone here wants to join, those are open calls.
I would
just reach out to me. And
Orion, I would have those calls on every Thursday until we find out that we find a working solution here. I think every 2 weeks is a little bit too much.
Yeah,
because we need to come up with like a good criteria and fast. I don't think we should delay this. Whoever can join. We can take notes and share with everybody, and then we can discuss those notes on IOH and so on and so forth until we can like come up with something good.
So it's at 900 Pacific. Currently, it's bi-weekly, Josh, but we could consider. I have some overlap, but we could probably make it happen.
We can put it like in the days where it's not supposed to be. We can set a different time rather than moving the entire or adjusting your agenda to be in here. Or
it's just for this 1 week alone that I have an overlap. So, yeah.
I mean, I can lead the discussion. I need someone to take the notes because I can't. Like, I saw you taking the notes, and I really appreciate it, Orion. Because like I can't talk and type at the same time. But yeah, like I can easily lead the discussions if we meet on Thursday.
And
yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick one, and if there's a Thursday discussion every week, then it would be great to have a discussion on this every week at IOH until there's some resolution, because I want to create that tight loop between stuff that happens in the index of working, exactly, and then IOH as well, because you got different people who attend different these calls. So cool. I mean, it seems like people want to drop off, so let's wrap up and then bring this back to IOH next week. Thank you everyone for joining today's conversation. Maybe Payne Slim, if you have any final thoughts, feel free to share.
That's all good. Reach out to me or Payne if you want to participate in the Thursday calls. Those will be workshop type of calls where we all like specifically work on these criteria, and we'll bring the findings back here to IOH. So, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Amazing. Take care, guys. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.